In this video, we're going to look at approximations, and we're going to specifically look at approximating to decimal places. Well, what does that mean? The first thing we need to know is, what do we mean when we say decimal places? And very simply, decimal places are just the number of digits to the right of a decimal point. Sometimes people say after a decimal point, but we're going to be more specific, and we're going to talk about number of digits to the right of the decimal point. And so when we count up decimal places, all we're going to do is just count the numbers to the right of the decimal point. So if we had this number here, 4.1275, and we ask how many decimal places does this number have, well, we just go to the number and we count them off. 1, 2, 3, 4. That means it must therefore have 4 decimal places. 4 decimal places. I'm just going to short that to dec for quickness. Simple, right? Let's just see. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, when we approximate or when we round to a number of decimal places, all we're going to do is say, instead of using all those 4 decimal places when we talk about the number, we're just going to use a much shortened version. Let's say, for example, we're talking about dollars and cents. Normally, we're going to be rounding just to the last 2 decimal places. So let's round this number off to 2 decimal places and see, or approximate to 2 decimal places and see what that number is going to be. So I'm going to rewrite the number down here. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to the number and we're going to count those number of decimal places after the decimal point. So there's a decimal point there. So we got 1, 2, and then we're going to use a cutoff because we know that we don't want to go any further than that decimal place. And then we're going to say, well, is this 2 closer to 3 or is it closer to 2? Well, what we have to do for that is to look at the next digit. And the next digit will tell us if this number is actually closer to 3, and in this case it's 7. So that means you're 7 out of the 10 steps to get to the next point. So in this case it's closer to 3. So when we're rounding, we're going to just write it as 4.13 because that 7 was closer to the 3 than it was. It means the whole number is closer to the 3, 4.13, than it is closer to 4.12. If it were lower than 5, because 5 is the middle point, then we would just leave that 2 as it is, because that would mean it was closer to 4.12. The question is, of course, what do you do if this number is a 5? Well, by convention, we say we're going to let that 5 be closer to the higher number, and so we always round up when this following digit is 5 or greater, and we raise that last decimal place by 1. If it's lower than 5, we leave it as it is. So in a nutshell, that rule is, if the digit after the rounding place is greater than or equal to 5, you round up. Otherwise, you leave the number as it is. Let's look at another example before we go. Let's approximate this number here to 4 decimal places, 5.304048. 4 decimal places. So again, we just count off the number of decimal places. There's a decimal point there. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4. That's where we're going to draw our cutoff line right there. And then we look to the next digit, and that's this one here. And we see, is it 5 or greater? Well, no, 4 is not greater than 5 or not equal to 5. So this one has to stay as is. So this becomes 5 point, keep the same digits, 3, 0, 4, 0. And what do you notice? Let me close that 0 off. We notice that even though this is a 0, we still have to include it because we're being asked to round to or approximate to 4 decimal places. And so there have to be those 4 places in this number that we write as the approximated number. And in this case, that last digit was a 0, so it must remain as a 0. Even though we know normally when we're writing decimals, if that last digit is a 0, we just drop it off. Because we are looking specifically at decimal places, we have to include it here. Let's try one more, and we're going to round this one to 6. No, we're going to round it to 1 decimal place. And I'm going to give you 36.551. Just to 1 decimal place, 1 dec place. So again, we just count 1 spot after the decimal point. Check to see whether it's 5 or greater. Well, in this case, it is 5. And so this 5 has to go up, and it becomes 36.6. Let's just do one last example. And again, we're going to round to 1 decimal place. But in this case, we're going to have 12.97 to 1 decimal place again. 1 decimal place again. Okay? And so again, we do the cutoff right after the 1 digit after the decimal point. Is it greater than 5? Yes, it is greater than 5. So that means we have to raise this by 1. But when we raise this by 1, it becomes 10. And so what do you think happens? Well, just like addition, you have to carry that 1, and so this becomes 13 point, and you're just left with a 0 there. And again, you have to leave that 0 as that last decimal point. So 13.0. The entire next column has to be raised because this goes up from 12.9 to 12.10 essentially. Obviously, you can't have that. And if you look at the number, it makes sense. 12.97 rounded up is close to 13. So that makes entire sense. So that's approximations to decimal places. The next video, we're going to look at approximations to significant figures.